That's great. Our Matthew series is behind us, and we've even done some topical sermon series along the way. We're about to turn to Joshua, so if you want to turn there, you can, but we're hardly going to get into it. And I promise you, we're not going to read every single verse in every chapter, but we'll cover a lot of it. Our focus will hopefully be on the stories, learning the lessons, not just getting the information, but taking to heart the application. I think sometimes we wonder why we spend some time or any time in the Old Testament when we're New Covenant people. And that is true, but the Old Testament is inspired, you know. Paul wrote to the young man, the evangelist Timothy, and said in the second letter we have, chapter 3, all Scripture is God-breathed, or inspired, as yours may say. So remember, please, that the only Scriptures they had at the time was the Old Scriptures. So all Scriptures, and those Scriptures are, as he says, profitable or useful for teaching and rebuking and correcting and training in righteousness. So let's look at the Old Testament as good and useful and profitable. Dale Ralph Davis writes in his book on Joshua, and I'll use him a lot in the series, if the church is to recover the Old Testament, our expositions of it must show that without torturing or twisting, it speaks for the comfort and correction of the saints. We need this. This is good for us. Remember that. Davis goes on to point to a pivotal verse in Joshua that comes a lot later, chapter 21. Not one of all the Lord's good promises to Israel failed. Every one was fulfilled. So we'll get to this book and we'll read it and remember God is proving Himself faithful, fulfilling His own words, being true to them. So we might assume this book is about Joshua or about Israel, but really it is, but it's about the Lord. It's about the Lord. And sometimes we get into these books and some people get bored because it's history, we might label it history, and everybody hates history. Well, ask some of our kids still in school. Studying history, some might say, is kind of like kissing your great aunt who has a mustache. It's not pleasant, but it's necessary. It's necessary. But this is bigger than just the facts, than the story, than the part of history. It is, as Moyer says, a declaration from God about God. From God about God. So remember that. We need to spend some time, I think, in the backstory leading up to Joshua's story. So you may have heard it a million times, and maybe this is your first. But the very first verse of Joshua, the only one we're going to read, is this. After the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord said to Joshua, son of Nun, Moses' aide, Moses, my servant, is dead. What a way to start a book, with a death, a funeral. But that's how it begins. And you may not know this, or maybe you do. It's also how it ends. Joshua begins with one big death, Moses's, and ends with three important burials, Joshua's, Eleazar's, and the bones of Joseph. The bones of Joseph. Why does that matter? Because this story goes before Moses and Joshua. It goes back to Joseph's day. Joseph, who ended up in Egypt, sadly, but providentially, who ended up saving his own family, the Israelites. Put him there and they feasted when others were going through famine, and he lived there and he died there, and before he died, he made his family promise, do not leave me here. You carry me out when you leave. So they did. They did. Moses' generation carried the bones out, and Joshua's generation buried them. But I need to go back even before Joseph. This story doesn't start with Moses or Joshua or Joseph. It goes before that to another. His name is Abram. Genesis chapter 12, when God calls Abram out of his land and puts him toward a new land and promises him a new land and a seed and a blessing that would bless all people all over the world, every nation through him. And he trusts God enough to follow him out, leaves Ur and goes down and finds a new place, trusting God along the way. God tells him about a son he will have, predicts he'll have a son, and he and his wife giggle just a little bit because that's funny. They're old. God gives him a new name too, not just a son, Abraham. And Abraham would have Isaac, and Isaac would have Jacob, and Jacob's name would be changed to Israel. And Israel is saved in Egypt. But after they're saved in Egypt, some 400 years of slavery, and they finally get out. Maybe you know that story. God sends a deliverer in an unlikely package. A baby, a Hebrew baby lying in a basket, floating in a river, raised in the palace, run out of the country, and finally standing back there before the family that raised him, the Pharaoh family. God sends him to confront the great leader of the great empire, and he does it with a stick in his hand and a vocal brother by his side and a faith that God could do what he could do, what he said he could do. And God does it. 10 plagues later, just as God said, Moses and all of the people walked out of slavery toward the promised land. They don't even get very far. And they're sandwiched between an impassable Red Sea and a threatening Egyptian army, and God must get them out of this with a miracle if they're going to survive it, and he does it again. They cross the river on dry ground. They turn around to see Pharaoh's army drown in the waters. They travel till they come to Sinai. God gives them his instructions at the hand of a man on tablets of stone. They travel farther. They are led and fed by God all through the way. Eventually, they get to the Jordan River. They're on the east side of the Jordan, looking west, ready to go in. They send their 12 spies in, one man from each tribe, to bring back a good report. The report comes back and it's mixed at best. Evidence of a bountiful harvest, obvious in the fruit they carry on their shoulders, but scary stories start being told about the humongous men who live there who could squash them. 10 men say they can't do it. Only 2 say they can with God's help, and the 2 faithful ones are Caleb and Joshua. Joshua. They try their best to plead with Israel, put the faith back in them. But it spreads, the unfaithfulness, the fear spreads like a pandemic among them until all of them are believing what the 10 believe. They can't do it. God can't even do it. And for that, God sends them back on this wandering journey as all of them who are 20 and older will die. They'll die in the 40 years of wandering. Only the youngest, under 20, will make it. Only Joshua and Caleb, among the oldest, will make it, and they will find themselves back at that same spot, looking west, trying to decide if they can take the land as God promised or not. Will they? Will they be like their parents? Or will they trust the Lord? Moses stands there and repeats the laws and the commandments to a new generation. Moses says, chapter 26, verse 16 of Deuteronomy, "The Lord your God commands you this day to follow the decrees and laws. Carefully observe them with all your heart and with all your soul. You have declared this day that the Lord is your God, and that you will walk in his ways, that you will keep his decrees, commands, and laws, and that you will obey him. And the Lord has declared this day that you are his people, his treasured possession, as he promised, and that you are to keep all his commands. He's declared that he will set you in praise and fame and honor high above the other nations he has made, and that you will be a people holy to the Lord your God, as he promised." Do you keep hearing that? To remind them of what is at stake, Moses sends 6 tribes up the mount, Gerizim, to speak the blessings to the people, and 6 tribes up Mount Ebal to pronounce the curses. And the Levites would recite to all the people so that they could hear it, the curses that would come if they did not obey the Lord. Moses repeats how God has blessed them over and over and over, and will if they would just listen to him and follow him. And then he reminds them how God would curse them over and over and over if they disobey him. Chapter 29, Moses takes them on a walk through their past, through their history, reminding them how God has brought them this far. He says, "Your eyes saw it." They saw all that the Lord did in Egypt, to Pharaoh, to his officials, to the land. With your own eyes, you saw those great trials, those miraculous signs and great wonders. And he leads them in their minds, through their memories, with the 40 years of wandering, reminding them, God provided for you. He conquered your enemies. You stand here because of him. And he warns them again, follow the Lord. Do not disobey. If you do not hold to the oaths, to the covenant, he'll punish you. Now he goes on to give them a choice, and I'll come back to that later, the choice. But he tells them, this Moses, who now is 120 years old, he says to them, I'm not going in. If you remember why you can't, it's because of the rock and the water. Go read it if you want. I'm not crossing over, he says, but then he says, the Lord your God himself will cross over ahead of you. He'll destroy the nations before you, and you'll take possession of the land. Joshua also will cross over ahead of you. Joshua, as the Lord said, the Lord will deliver these people to you. Do to them as I have commanded you. Be strong and courageous. Don't be afraid. Don't be terrified because of them. The Lord your God goes with you. He will never leave you. He will never forsake you. He brings Joshua up to himself, and the Lord then is going to commission him through Moses, and he's going to repeat to him the same thing. Be strong, be courageous. And so the stage is set. They stand there at the river's edge one more time, right where their parents stood before they died, now ready to cross over if they would just be faithful. Moses writes down the law and gives it to the priests. Here's some reminders, gives them a stern warning and a prediction. I know how rebellious and stiff-necked you are. If you've been rebellious against the Lord while I have been alive, how much more will you rebel after I die? Ouch. And then he teaches them a song, chapter 32, all about what God has been doing. And he says to them, take to heart all the words I have solemnly declared to you this day, so that you may command your children to obey carefully all the words of the law. They're not just idle words for you. They are your life. And by them you'll live long in the land you're to cross the Jordan to possess. So Moses blesses the tribes, climbs up Mount Nebo, and from that vantage point can peer into the promised land. And the Lord shows him the boundaries, shows him all of the land. And there it says Moses died. And there it says God buried him, and no one knows where his grave is. And of course, Israel mourns their 30 days of grief. And then we get a glimpse into who this next guy is going to be to lead them. Now Joshua, son of Nun, filled with the spirit of wisdom because Moses laid his hands on him, and the Israelites listened to him and did what the Lord had commanded Moses. So the torch of leadership is passed. Joshua now holds it. Joshua will now lead them. And that's where we get to Joshua 1. Now let me go back and say something that I skipped over, and I want to press it on us this morning. It has to do with life and choice. Life and choice. We sometimes have a family game night in the Gentry house, and one of the games we have played is a game maybe you've played. It's called Life. Life. It's an entertaining game. It can be a frustrating game for this old man here. What's built into the game is chance. You spin the top, you spin the wheel, and it almost always comes off in my hand. I don't know why, but you put it back on and you spin it, and whatever you get, you move and you land on, and you take a card. Or you do what the square says. And it's fun, and it's hard, and it's frustrating, but you get what you get and you don't throw a fit. You need to know that. And it's also built into the game choice. You can go this way or this way. A career, job, college. You get to sometimes choose a house. Sometimes the kids come whether you want them to or not. It's silly. But there are some parts of the game that sound a lot like real life. Some have suggested that the average person makes some 35,000 choices a day. You have made many today already. Just what you're going to wear, and you look great. Well done on that one. Some choices matter so very little, and some matter so much. We are the products of our choices. Our futures are created by what we decide today. And some choices are so pivotal that our eternity rests in them. Like the one facing Israel as Moses lays it out. Here we are, chapter 30, starting in verse 11. And I want to read this, so listen. Now, what I am commanding you today is not too difficult for you or beyond your reach. It's not up in heaven, so that you have to ask, who will ascend into heaven to get it and proclaim it to us so we may obey it? Nor is it beyond the sea, so that you have to ask, who will cross the sea to get it and proclaim it to us so we may obey it? No. No, the word is very near you, It's in your mouth. It's in your heart so that you may obey it. See, I set before you today life and prosperity and death and destruction. For I command you today, love the Lord your God, walk in obedience to Him, keep His commands, decrees, and laws. Then you will live and increase, and the Lord your God will bless you in the land you're entering to possess. But if your heart turns away and you are not obedient, and you are drawn away to bow down to other gods and worship them, I declare to you this day, you will certainly be destroyed. You will not live long in the land you're crossing the Jordan to enter and possess. So this day I call the heavens and the earth as witnesses against you that I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Now, choose life. Choose life so that you and your children may live and that you may love the Lord your God. Listen to His voice. Hold fast to Him, for the Lord is your life. And He will give you many years in the land He swore to give to your fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. No excuses, Moses says. You can't say it's too hard to obey. It's not. You can't say you didn't know. You know. You know the commands. You have the promises of the blessings. You have the curses if you don't. It's your choice. It's your choice. I set it before you, He says. You get to choose. You have to choose. Which do you want? Which do you desire? I want you to love the Lord. I command you to love the Lord. I want you to follow Him. I want you to walk in His ways. I want you to do exactly as He has said. If you do it, you'll live. You'll increase. You'll prosper. It's going to be fantastic. But if you don't, if you disobey, if your heart turns away, if you go chasing after other gods and bowing down to them, it's going to be death to you. You will be destroyed. You're finished. So heaven and earth, we're going to witness this today, the choice you make. The choice is the greatest choice of all, life and death. Blessings and curses. Which will you choose? I don't know if you've ever seen the show on A&E called Intervention, but it's gut-wrenching. I've not seen many. I've seen a few. There was an episode about 5 years ago where Todd is confronted by his family and friends. As often happens in the episodes, they surprise him by bringing him into a room. He's holding on to his drink, and he sees all of them, and he's like, "What's up here?" They have their papers because they've written them out, thought them out, typed them out, and they're ready to say the words that are on there that need to be said. And Todd's struggling. He's really struggling. His sister speaks first, and she reads what she wants to say. Eventually, his own mother speaks up. His best friends, who just said some words at his dad's funeral, and they're all pleading with Todd because he's got a daughter, and he's wasting his life. He's drinking his life. He's got alcohol that is ruining him, and more than that, meth has controlled him. He's addicted, and he is going to die, and they know it. So they beg him with their words. They cry as they beg him with their words. Please, please get help. Each episode is different but similar. The names and faces change. The families and friends change, but the message is always the same, as they all always try to say, choose well, choose better, choose life. In some ways, Moses is having an intervention now with Israel. At the end of his life, here we are, Deuteronomy. He's saying it before he dies, and wouldn't you know it, by the time Joshua is at the end of his life in Joshua 24, he has his own intervention with the same kind of people saying, choose well, choose better, choose life. And each generation has the same choice. Each generation gets to choose. Each generation has to choose. And often it's the oldest among the faithful who speak to the younger ones who may not even be listening well to choose well. I wonder if some of you in here have had some heart-to-hearts with your family, and I'm guessing some of us in this room before our death are going to say some things that we maybe should have said all along to some family and some friends, how they must choose and choose well. I hope I'm not at the end of my life. I hope I've got some more years to live. But I'm very aware as an aging man that I have more years behind me than in front of me, and some of you know that better than I do. So could I be a voice something like Moses today for you? You may think you're young and you don't have to choose. Not yet, but you're wrong. You need to choose now, and please choose well. Maybe you're here reluctantly. You didn't really want to come. This religious stuff really isn't for you. You don't even think you have to choose. In fact, you will not choose, but your indecision is choosing. So please choose well. And all of you, no matter your age or your place in life or how you think you're doing, I'm warning you. You're choosing your eternity with your choices you make today, so choose well. I think there are a lot of people in this world and in our country who figure they are enlightened. And I think they might just be living in the darkness because they are deceived. And some think they live the good life, but it's the wrong life. Because there's lots of folks who are following their heart and choosing their path. And I'm afraid they're on the wrong path because they're not supposed to be following their heart, but the Lord's. Proverbs 14:12, there's a way that seems right to a man, but in the end it leads to death. Jesus said words like, "Come to me, follow me, and abide in me." And I recommend you do it in faith and repentance and baptism. Do it. Maybe I don't know you, but I still want to warn you and challenge you and encourage you today. Choose well. Choose life. Choose to follow the Lord. Choose Him for your family's sake and all who come after you and them. Choose life. Love the Lord. Listen to Him. Hold on to Him as if your life depends on it, because your life depends on it. The Lord is life. He is your life if you will just choose Him, follow Him, and live for Him. Let's stand and sing this song. Come if you need to.